Well, firstly, nice to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us. Very warm welcome from UBDS and Microsoft. Today, we've got a packed out webinar with a lot of content and some really great speakers. I'm Simon Johnson. I'm a Client Engagement Director here at UBDS. And for this webinar, I'll be your main host. If you've got any questions at all, we welcome the questions. So throughout this engagement, we're more than happy to have those conversations. Or if you'd like to ask a question in the chat bot, we're more than happy to have those conversations in the message towards the back end of it. So before we kick off and get into things, let's actually meet the team. So as mentioned, we've got a packed out content with some really great speakers. I'll be starting off by giving you a little bit of an overview and introduction to UBDS, who we are and what we do. We'll then hear from Microsoft, Scott and Dave. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get to your views on not only the industry challenges, but more importantly, how technologies like AI and chatbots will really lend itself to digitizing and automating the future landscape as well. So I'm super excited to hear about that as well. We'll then get a chance to see the Bobby bot, a tour and a demo by John Sidesurf. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to that. And then we'll hand over to Sylvia, who'll talk about Gen AI and actually about how some of the fantastic automations and intelligence can really make a massive difference. Following that, we'll then move into a little bit about UBDS and then following up in terms of the next steps. And then we'll move into more of a Q&A. So as mentioned, for those that don't know UBDS, I've never come across us before. We're an SME digital transformation specialist organization. We have substantial expertise and experience within the police and justice sector. And we're a little bit of a different organization in the respect that we work with people, process, strategy, and technology. And when we're looking at transformative digital transformation, the key thing and the key enabler for us is that we really want to work with organizations to understand how we can make sure that we're looking at significant, measurable, and sustainable digital transformation. And for me, what that means is that we're not looking to deliver technology. We're not looking to push technology as a core agenda. Technology is the only enabler. And as mentioned, we're looking to work across people, process, and strategy to really understand what it is that we're trying to deliver. What are those problems and pain points? And we're looking to work with various police forces to make sure that we actually understand the measurable and the metrics of what does that digital transformation look like. As an organization, we are proud that we have a digital transformation and advisory board. This practice is a dedicated team of consultants that actually work with organizations to help define, redefine, and also create things like digital business cases, strategy documents, and actually target operating models as well. And this is exceptionally unique in the industry because, again, not only do we have our technology pillars and our in-house credibility and expertise, but we have a separate practice which is really focused about working with organizations to understand and define that future landscape, the future strategy, and the roadmap as well. So if you're looking at business case designs, strategies, again, future operating models in terms of how to get the best out of that actual environment, again, that's exactly where we can help and support. Underneath that, we have our technology pillars, which on the left-hand side, you can see covers everything from things like cloud infrastructure, cloud networking, business applications, and data and AI. And then within our practices, we also have cybersecurity as well, which is a large practice where we look at things like Azure Central, for argument's sake. And then on the further right-hand side, everything that we do is around ongoing managed services and support. The great thing about that is us being an SME, we can tailor those managed services to either a person on site working as part of your existing teams, or actually more of a traditional managed service whereby you have a tiered approach of a service desk backed by technical support as well. In terms of our expertise, I'm just waiting for the slides to catch up, forgive me. In terms of our expertise within the police and justice sector, as mentioned, we have substantial expertise working across a number of organisations that you'll be very, very recognisable as well. We cover a number of national and local organisations, including NCA. We've worked with the Met Office, Met Police, for argument's sake, and a number of different local police forces, as mentioned here. I think the key thing about it is not only do we work with organizations from a transformative perspective, but we also work closely with Microsoft, and we would deliver a number of engagements such as things like hackathons and funded engagements to make sure that organizations not only get the best value out of the technology, but we take them through a discovery and a design process so that we can help provide things like training, onboarding, and support before we even get into the technology area as well. As mentioned, in terms of our expertise and experience within the police and justice sector, we're currently working across a number of different organisations, and here's some really great examples of the work that we do. Currently working with the MOJ on designing a new prisoner community application solution, which is going to impact every single prison and prisoner within the UK. It's a fantastic opportunity and something that we're super excited about. We're working with the NCA and being a key implementation partner for the online safety bill as a great example. And we've worked closely in the past with PDS, actually as part of the national rollout for Azure Sentinel as well, impacting a number of UK police forces as well. So that should really give you an idea in terms of some of our expertise within the police and justice sector. In terms of our Power Platform capabilities, so we have a number of application libraries which are specific to each particular sector, and actually we do have a specific library which is dedicated to the policing sector. We've had to narrow this down to a number of applications which we think are most pertinent and relevant to this particular conversation. But here's some really great examples. So we've got a vetting and security database, for argument's sake, which actually is the form of an application. We have officer in a case as well. We have expense claims. We have victim update and a victim portal. And then we also have a supplier portal as well. Again, these are applications that we've worked with organizations to help build, design, and develop. And actually they are formed as part of a library. So what that means is you can access them as a single application, and you can work with us to get the best value out of those applications and potentially build it within your environment. Or you can actually have access to our library as a whole, which is a separate conversation. And therefore, not only will you get access to the individual licenses, but you could potentially get access to all of the applications within that library as well. If you'd add any more questions with regards to some of the things that I've covered today, more than happy to have those conversations separately by the questions or have those separate conversations as well. So that's me giving you a little bit of an overview in terms of UBDS, who we are, what we do. I've covered our experiences, I've covered our services, I've covered a little bit about our Power Platform. But for me, that's everything for now. And we're going to hand it over to Scott and David to pick up the Microsoft piece. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Simon. So for those that don't know me, my name is Scott Hart. I'm one of the account directors for Microsoft. I see a few familiar names on the call, which is great to see, and a few new ones as well. So welcome. So what I wanted to do is just set some initial context, really, around some of the policing kind of landscape and challenges that we've seen, but more broadly around AI as well. So I'm probably preaching to the converted a lot, to the folks on the call. It's very hard to avoid the topic of AI at the minute, very much a hot topic across not just policing, but broader sectors and industries as well. And we're kind of in this golden era, I think, at the minute, in the last 12 months or so. So comparing something like ChatGPT, which is a product that hopefully a few of you had a chance to play around with from one of our AI partners in OpenAI. Some of the paradigm shifting technologies in the last 30 years, if we look at the time it took from that technology to be introduced to a market and then reach a kind of core mass of 100 million users, things like mobile phones, which we all kind of take for granted these days, that took 16 years from the word go through to 100 million users. Similarly, the internet took 7 years to get to that point. Facebook and the social media kind of generation of things as well took around 4.5 years. But ChatGPT earlier this year took 3 months to get from 0 to 100 million users, which I think really shows the pace at which this market's moving. It's changing to the point where even my parents, who are not the most tech savvy folks in the world, are starting to use ChatGPT as well and asking me, like, how do I use this? How can I prompt it? And some of that stuff is coming out as well, which is amazing to see. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's moving at pace. People are really seeing the benefit of generative AI in terms of how they use it in their daily lives, from their personal lives through to how they work and their kind of professions and sectors. So I just wanted to flag some research that Microsoft does on a regular basis called the Work Trend Index, which effectively surveys employees and leaders across not just a particular sector, but a variety of sectors. And we kind of started asking the question, given the rise of AI in the last 12 months or so, what is it that employees want from AI? How do you see it impacting your day-to-day work? And by far the most resounding feedback we got from that was, we want to be able to find information and find answers to questions more quickly and more effectively. Now, there were some other areas in here around, meeting summarizations, help me with my admin tasks, help me plan my day, help me with creating content, that kind of thing. But I think it's fair to say the most popular answer there was, help me find information, help me find answers. So that's a non-sector specific bit of feedback there, which is really interesting. But if we apply that feedback to policing, now I've referenced some feedback from the Casey review here. Now, I know that was a Met specific review, but I think some of the feedback there is very much appropriate and applicable to the other forces as well. So some of the feedback you can see here, how can you find information and access that out on the streets when some of the systems aren't fit for purpose? While on paper there are more officers there, they're bums on seats, but the lack of experience is very notable. And I think the statistics back that up, with around 50% of the front line having less than 5 years experience in general. And that, feeds into then that it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy then, where you've got, inexperienced frontline officers retraining and bringing in new officers into the force and training those. So I don't want to use the phrase blind leading the blind, but it becomes a knowledge management is absolutely key then to ensure that officers are skilled in the right way. They know what they're capable of, their abilities, when they're out policing the front line. Excuse me. So with that in mind, I've gone forward too much there, bear with me. So how does technology and AI address this? Where do we see the intersect point? So we started thinking about this concept with the feedback from the Work Trend Index, with the feedback from the Casey review, is just how do we apply this to the context of policing? So there's probably 3 criteria we've got to think about, and this is where ourselves and Microsoft and UBDS have been collaborating. It needs to be portable, right? It needs to be deployed to the front line, something that's accessible quite easily from the front line. And obviously, most of you will be aware of Power Apps and the kind of Power Platform stack that have been used in the last couple of years. Really delivered value to that low-code, no-code application experience in building and writing applications that have been deployed to the front line. And you've got the likes of the Police Digital Service, who run an app solution catalog as well, which is ideal. So that's kind of the ideal front end for end users. Bringing in that level of intelligence as well. So I mentioned OpenAI before. Our collaboration with OpenAI has resulted in some of the services within Azure, like the Azure OpenAI service, which brings that GPT model experience and that natural language conversational experience into some of the systems that we can design with the forces. And then thirdly, it's got to be well trained, right? It's got to be fed standard operating procedures, guidance documents, that kind of thing. So to create an experience whereby a frontline officer can, via a Power App, query in natural language, what are my powers under X, Y, Z? What do I do in this situation? As a way to front up information quickly and effectively, as opposed to having to sift through procedure documents, etc., guidance documents on intranet sites and along those lines. So that's kind of the 3 pillars of the concept that we've come up with, which is very much the kind of birth of this BobbyBot concept, which we'll go on and show you now. But I just wanted to set that as a bit of context in terms of some of the industry trends more broadly, that related to policing, and how we see this firming up for the front line as well. And without further ado, I'll pass on to my colleague Dave Rawlings, who will talk a little bit more about the information advantage in policing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Rawlings. I'm a technology strategist in Microsoft that supports UK policing. And before joining Microsoft, it may be worth pointing out that I had a career in policing and fortunate to be in a role now which connects both of my 2 passions together, which is improving policing and technology. So great. The wealth of data and the obligation on officers and police staff to have that data, that information available to them at the time they need it, because that, of course, is what BobbyBot will go on to show you, no doubt. But before we get there, I just wanted to give some grounding around some concepts around this, around how we see it. So very much there's no doubt that data has become one of the most valuable commodities on earth. I think that's well understood now. And there was, you know, a large-scale move for organisations to become data-driven. Of course, in policing, where environmental factors, other influential factors, relying solely on data is never gonna lead to successful outcomes. So what we're trying to do is tip the balance to make data be seen as a tool in the toolbox, but in a really balanced way where it can be seen alongside expertise, intuition, and all those other factors that play a part in police officers making really good decisions when they're at the scene of a crime or when they're analysing a particular case, etc. And therefore, this leads to this next slide here, which is about how we can bring that information to their fingertips, and in doing so connect human intelligence and machine intelligence. And we think when we bring the two together, that's when it's going to be real success. So I've just got to really I've put this into a visual for today's session to hopefully try and illustrate how I see Bobbybot being used in practice, how it can be used to support the front line, particularly around young in-service officers and the need to carry on supporting them and ensuring that they have the knowledge and information at the time they need it. So this is a visual I've put together around the policing process without AI. So if you consider some information being passed through to an analyst, which is what's happening here, clicked on one too much there, forgive me. So you can see there's been information being passed there to an analyst. And the intention there is to go and explore internal systems, explore publicly available information, to explore law and procedure documents perhaps. And you've got all this information coming in to be manually analysed, assessed and reviewed. And ultimately what that means is people's buckets get full really quickly. So their brain gets to capacity really quickly. So leaning back to the previous slide, that then doesn't tip the balance in favour of a really balanced view of how we should think when we're at the scene of a crime or respond to an incident or considering analysis of a particular challenge or trying to problem solve. So that research can take place by a call taker and self-research, but the point is before we deploy, before we leave to go to a crime scene, we're asking our police officers and our police staff to think to really take into consideration a significant amount of information, which is not readily available perhaps. So on the next slide, what we've tried to bring together is a visual here, which sees what that process would look like with generative AI built in. And you'll see that information is passed through, and it could be at the scene of an incident, or it could be before you leave. So it could be any question, but in this concept, it was tell me how we can safely forensically recover a digital device. So that would go through a process of utilising ChatGPT or the OpenAI service, which will go out and gather all that information that's important to the question and return the requisite knowledge in a way that can be placed into a product, summarized, key points highlighted, and that could be when you're on the road or it could be behind the desk. But the point is that utilization graph, which you'll see at the top of that illustration there, is significantly tipped in favor of having that balanced view. So the idea is that when an officer's at a crime scene, they've got the ability to think about those environmental factors, think about other external influences, think about using their initiative, intuition, their knowledge, their tradecraft, in addition to thinking about all that data that will be relevant to where they are today. So this is kind of the concept as we see it behind the why Bobbybot was born out of a concept and why that's been developed alongside a police force. And with that in mind, John, please can you take us through the demo so everyone on the call can have a good look at what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. So I'll give you a bit of background around how Bobbybot came to be. It was actually born out of a hackathon session that we ran around looking at how we could help solve the problem of expense claims with involvement from police forces, including things like automated approvals for expenses, calculating mileage. And one of the problems was there were a lot of expense policy documents, and oftentimes it was confusing as to what you were entitled to claim as part of the expense process. So we built BobbyBot as part of that expense claims app to essentially just make an API call to the OpenAI service with that publicly available service and preface that prompt with, as a police officer at XYZ police force, what am I entitled to claim on this expense claim? And it would pull the sort of the response back from that API call. Now, obviously, the concern with that is going out to an open public service. What is happening with that data? And obviously, one of the sort of key opportunities is why limit it to expense claims? Why not involve hundreds of policy documents, which could be used for a number of different purposes? So if you go to the next slide, please. I don't know if I've got control here. Yep, thank you. So yeah, police forces have a vast number of policy and procedure documents that tend to be stored in disparate locations. It could be on paper, on file, it could be in a SharePoint library. Obviously the challenge is getting access to that in time. So the BobbyBot aims to build that sort of consolidate that information into a chatbot experience to then provide that information on time for the person requesting it. It could be a number of different scenarios, like a death in custody, taser discharge, or sort of general information around annual leave policy and sickness policy. Oh, we've lost the presentation. Oh, thank you. And more importantly, get analytics and management information around what people are searching for, what are the common problems that people are searching for, so we can identify those areas as maybe areas which need more training or more involvement. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. So the application itself is about Power Apps. So the query is sent through the Power Apps front end. It then uses Azure AI Studio using OpenAI 3.5 Turbo model to understand that query. Then uses Azure Cognitive Search to retrieve relevant documents which have been indexed and then respond to the Power App with that response. So that then solves the issue of going out to the OpenAI service, because all of that information is kept within the Azure tenant. So the query is kept inside the Azure tenant, and the query responses aren't then used to train the model, which is another concern. It is all kept within that Azure tenant. Next slide, please. Yeah, we've tested it with hundreds of policy documents, and the responses that we are getting, yeah, will look to be on point. We do have another additional admin application which can be used to control the parameters as well. Another concern was, how do we adjust the response of the bot? Is it going to be making up answers that it isn't certain about? From the administration app, you can control at what level the certainty is before it returns a response as one of the parameters. So next slide, please. I guess I think the next slide is a demo which can show you the actual application itself. So yeah, from here it is essentially just a Power Apps solution. So the first parts of it are environment variables. So when the solution is installed, these environment variables will be populated to point it towards the correct Azure resources. We have the BobbyBot application itself, the administration application, the parameters, which define the different parameters for the app itself, an admin security role and user security role to define who has access to the parameter data, and the Power Automate flow, which then pulls the query data from the OpenAI service. So looking at the admin application, a very simple application to define different sets of parameters. From here, we can look at the different parameters that are involved in the application. So role information is the sort of the pretext as to how the agent should respond to the questions. Temperature and top P, frequency penalty, presence penalty, and max tokens are all configurable to then define certainty and of the response of the answers as well. So I'll open up the app itself. So the BobbyBot application. So there's a few policy documents that we have in here at the moment. One around vehicle pursuits, another around stop and search, and some more documents around public order, public safety. So we can start with a query around vehicle pursuits. So when should I begin vehicle pursuit? So this hopefully should return a response within around 3 to 5 seconds is normal for response time. And it's given us some information based on policy and procedure as to when to begin a vehicle pursuit. Let's ask a more specific question. I'm going to just copy and paste in here in interest of time. Can I engage in a pursuit while driving a minibus? And here it's telling us no minibuses are specifically excluded from undertaking pursuits. So let's ask a question about a specific terminology. What does red mist mean? And it's given us a colloquial term, and it's then framed it in the context of vehicle pursuits. So going on to stop and search, we can ask some general questions about the stop and search principles. Oh, incorrectly. What are the quality of service principles related to stop and search? And it's given us the high-level principles related to stop and search. So let's ask a specific question as an officer who has just stopped someone. So I have stopped someone who's wearing religious headgear. Can I ask them to remove it for a search? And again, it's given us considerations that we need to take if we do want to do that. Let's try, how about if it's a vulnerable person, performing a stop and search on a vulnerable person, how should I approach that? It's given us some information on how to approach performing a stop and search on a vulnerable person. And of course, there's no reason why it should be limited to frontline officers. It could be for different role profiles as well. So for example, let's ask what role profiles are involved in deployment of public order, public safety.
John, there's just a couple of questions which is coming through. Do you mind if I just call out some of them whilst you're going through this?
Yeah, sure.
So I think one of them first is from Anthony. Did you use ChatGPT 3.5 instead of 4 because of cost, or is there a specific usability factor which made the older version more suitable?
Yeah, well, it's being used at the moment as it's cheaper and quicker. You can implement GPT-4 for it, However, it would be sort of a different costing model for that one. I can provide some detail on the costing at the end, so I'll pop that in the chat at the end.
Okay. And Niccolo, do you get the same response each time? If not, is there a feedback loop for the user to rate a response?
Not at the moment, but that's something that we're hoping to build into it. What we'd like to do is, with the release of Copilot Studio, I think it was last week for general availability, what we'd like to do is build this within Copilot Studio and bring in things like escalations, so people can provide feedback on responses, possibly even escalate to like a live chat with an actual person if they don't receive the correct response, or even launch things like approvals and workflows directly from the chat itself. But again, that's things that we'd really like to work with people who are the subject matter experts to tell us what is going to be valuable from there and what's going to be the most impactful to build into it. What are the next steps for us? So in terms of handling things that it doesn't know about, let's say, take one from David's example. So tell me how to recover a digital device which is still switched on from a crime scene. Now, there is some information about recovering the digital device, but I believe not about how to recover one which is still switched on. So it's pointed me in the direction of the expert on that specific process, as it didn't know. That again is something we'd like to work on, is using your own internal data. If it can't find an answer to it, have a fallback to then point it to a specific resource or where to get information. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions, but as I said, there will be time for questions at the end as well.
And just one final one, just before we move on. I think there's really pertinent again from Anthony Joshua, and thank you for your input here. Is there a cost per query for the API call out to OpenAI?
Yeah, there is a cost per query. Is sort of measured in the number of tokens per response. Again, I can drop in some information on the costing to that. In terms of licensing, it will need a premium Power Apps license, so each user will need either a per app license or a per user license to use the actual Power App front end.
Brilliant. Thank you. Just one final one. Nick Edwards, haven't forgotten about yourself. I want to come back through to yourself. I can't mention the name. It's currently being tested and heavily developed by one of the UK's large police forces, but they're more than happy to be a reference as well. So happy to have a separate conversation. Happy to set up a conversation directly with the police force that's using this as we speak. But on this forum, I can't mention the name. Thank you.
So I'll pass you on to Sylvia to discuss the next section.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Sylvia Lennis. I'm the Practice Director for Data and AI. And I'm really, really excited to be here today and great to see so many of you on the call. Personally, I had the privilege to join some police forces on duty one night in Westminster. And it was absolutely incredible just to see the variety of tasks that they had to go to. The word tasks doesn't at all do it justice, but went really from difficult situations from a psychiatric ward who escaped, had someone escape and dealing with that, to moving to a totally different scenario with refugees who are cooking in a parking lot but disturbing residents, to then going to a hotel and having an intruder between a large hotel in Westminster with all of these sort of back hallways and just absolutely incredible what they deal with and the variety of intelligence that they work with, because there's so many aspects. And to me, here with AI, we're talking about one specific aspect of that. We're talking about the policy, about the knowledge that they need to have for procedures, for processes, but they're really working with so much of their expertise that they need, of their own emotional intelligence, of the physical situational awareness, and dealing with so much all at once. So if there's anything that we can do, and I'm really, really proud of what the team have done with this application to empower them to focus their time on really applying that instead of searching for documents in a way which might not be optimal. I'm just really, really excited that we can hopefully help and make an impact there. And I think it's also a good example that this is not at all a replacement for that knowledge and expertise, but it's helping to deal with one aspect of searching for the information, how they consume it. And that's something too, which you've seen an example here, how that natural language process is coming out, but it can also be adapted, as you might also have forces with particular needs or subsets of that who have particular needs. So again, that response can be structured in a different way so that you do see it in exactly a way which is going to be right for the user, whether it might be seeing it, hearing it, or something else. So on that note, it's probably not completely news to you, sort of seeing this kind of application of AI. Everybody's talking about it since it's blown up, but equally are also talking about the risk. And that's something that I and my team spend a lot of time really understanding the algorithms behind the hood and the latest research, as well as the technical developments of what is really happening here. What are those algorithms on a fundamental level doing and optimizing for, and how can we understand what that risk landscape is? Many of these themes that you see here, they're probably things you've heard about before. There's the legal, compliance, data privacy questions. There's a case you might have seen in the news where a lawyer in court referenced a case which did not exist based on his interaction with ChatGPT, because his understanding was that was a search engine. There's the safety and ethics questions as well. There's the black box. There's the not necessarily having the right skills, and also that question around accuracy and hallucinations. So my team have spent a lot of time to understand that risk landscape, but then also map those mitigations. So we have a framework which we use to understand what are those critical elements, but then how can we apply that to a use case? And that's where the domain expertise and that interaction with the forces, with the users is really, really critical to ensure that we can apply those in a way that brings the best of the both worlds together. So if we could move to the next slide. Sorry, I will request. Yeah, thank you. So these are some of the pillars that we have identified in our maturity framework. So we're working with some organizations to help them understand where they are in that journey. And I'm not going to read through all of this, and please, I won't have a go at digesting all of it, but it's really how can we help organizations to understand what they should prioritize, because that landscape can be overwhelming. There is a lot of options, there's a lot of risk. So how can we make that really, really clear of where you are in your journey compared to what is appropriate for the use cases and goals that you have, and make it really simple in terms of these are the areas to prioritize and some practical steps on how you can move ahead. Move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So what that then looks like, so some organizations already have a really clear idea of where they are, and that's where, when it comes to the AI lifecycle, so say with this application or with AI, you want to implement it, the path is not wildly different to any other scenario. Steps you're probably very, very familiar with. You have to understand what's that sort of target state, identify the value, the business case, and that's where we also work with organizations to build that out, to say, right, what is that financial model that will help us to secure the investment, but also be confident on will we really see the value, and who exactly is that for, and what step of the process is that helping? From there, we then go to technical implementation. And again, we help there on the technical side as well as the user adoption side. Back in the risk slide, there were quite a lot of duplication in terms of the user training, where that featured against many different risks, because there are many ways that if the users understand what they should and shouldn't do and how to use the tool, that is really, really helpful and powerful in getting the most out of it. Also having AI-specific test approaches is a very, very important piece of our process, so that we can ensure that we're not looking at an average error score, because it's just not good enough when you have really, really high impact edge cases. You have to understand what those are and really be testing for that quite explicitly. That is particularly important when it comes to more of those tailor and train or build options. Whereas in other services like Copilot, where you're buying it and it's out of the box, again, a lot of that testing Microsoft have really, really heavily done to lock it down to particular scenarios. And then finally, there is the managed services element too. Again, that applies quite heavily to your tailor or train options. So if you have taken an algorithm and really applied it to one scenario, so for example, detecting potential violent behavior or detecting escalations in crowds is a use case which is widely applied with CCTV. But there you do want to then monitor the model to make sure it's still performing in the real world, because context changes, the way it's used might change. So having that managed service across the life cycle is an important element. I want to dive into just one example with the Copilot, as that's an area that many organizations who have Microsoft 365 are looking at, but also, as John was saying, has some really good alignment with the BobbyBot services here with some of those features. And there we're really looking at helping organizations and working with them in two particular ways. As one is, how do you get ready for Copilot? How do you have the confidence that your data privacy controls are in place, that you have the right licensing, that the value is really, really clear? And then the next step is that optimized. So that's really, how do you then enable the users to have the right sort of knowledge sharing framework, so that if someone has found a prompt which is really, really high value for a specific task, that can be used and applied across multiple teams. And of course, measuring the value is a very important piece too, so that there's an understanding of how it's used in the organization, and more focus can then be given from a Centre of Excellence perspective on how do you nurture those which are delivering value, and report that back to ensure that value is delivered. I'll hand over to Simon there to close us off with next steps.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to wrap up here, recognising time. Kyle Brown, thank you very much for your questions in the background. I believe that we've answered your questions in terms of how does the bot reference internal documents. We've answered that question. We've spoken about referencing material as well, which we've discussed the use of things like Copilot Studio to reference the libraries and information as well. And again, I think we've also covered off in terms of how we answer and handle questions whereby there is no answer for effectively. So we've already demonstrated that. Just looking at any other questions whilst I'm trying to skip on the. I'm just trying to skip on to. Are there any other questions just coming from the group that I can just take a look at? Nick Edwards, I see that you've joined again, so thank you very much. I'm not too sure if you got the response back, but yeah, we're currently testing and developing this with one of the UK's largest police forces. Happy to set up separate conversations from a reference point of view. Jez, we've covered off the questions in terms of licensing as well, in terms of what's needed. Brilliant, thank you very much for that. Just as a final point before you all leave, and just for the purpose of the recording as well. So from a what next perspective, so naturally every organization has a different use case, different requirements, and therefore we would absolutely recommend that the next logical step is some element of a discovery and design conversation. That really allows us to understand exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve. What type of environment do you currently have? Do you have a centre of excellence, for argument's sake, and are you looking to leverage AI for frontline workers? Are you looking to leverage AI for the back-end office applications? So every organization requires a different output. But once we've had that initial discovery and design conversation, that there are two methods in which you can contract and work with us. We can work with you on an application development point of view, which is whereby we would work with you on a time and materials basis. You'd have our dedicated staff who are FC cleared, and we can work with you in terms of either developing applications off the shelf or building out something completely bespoke and custom to yourself. Or an alternative option is if you actually require more of a holistic managed service and support, then we do offer a Power Platform and AI managed services, as mentioned before. And that includes a combination of training, technical support, access to service desk, and access to expert consultants as and when you need it as well. So they're the two options in which you wanted to engage. And if you wanted to build out your own Bobby bot in your environment, again, they're the two methods in which we can help and support. For us, that's everything. I think we've covered off all of your questions. And thank you very, very much for your time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all of your input, by the way. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. Here's my email address and details. We will send out the recording to everyone on this call, and we'll follow up with an email as well. We would look forward to the opportunity to engage you after this. More than happy to set up separate conversations with more of a dedicated one-on-one demonstration and overview, where we can go into the Bobby bot and our AI services on Copilot in much more detail to you and specific your requirements as well. But for us, thank you so much for your time. Everyone on the call as well, all speakers, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Cheers all. Thanks a lot.